Today we're going to talk about appeals, which were created by Aristotle. So we're going back about 2,300 years. We're going to look at the three types of appeals that he has given us, and we're going to see not only the benefits, but the drawbacks of each of these three appeals. So let's begin. In looking at these appeals, we're going to cover ethos, logos, and pathos. And again, these are different ways to persuade readers. And so it's going to be highly applicable to this last assignment, which is the persuasive letter. So we think of things that persuade us. We think, are we logical people and we're more persuaded by logic? Are we persuaded by how we feel in a situation? Or are we persuaded by maybe expert testimony? These are different ways of maybe appealing to a reader, or we think of sales. What do you respond to best in sales? Are you responding to logic or how you feel about a product or recommendations from others? So let's look at these individually within our own writing. We're going to look at ethos, which a lot of students will tell me that that's ethics. But again, ethics is kind of an abstract term that we need to define. So I think it's better to think of ethos as authority and credibility. Logos, students will say is logic, but we need to know what logic is. We're thinking about if-then statements. So if any of you are computer programmers, or maybe you know a lot about Excel, you might use logic to say, if this happens, then do this. Logic is working the same way with facts and reasoning. And then we have pathos, which is emotion. So we're getting these emotional appeals to have our reader feel something, and that might cause them to be persuaded as well. So if we look at ethos, again, we're looking at authority and credibility. Where this authority comes from could be expert opinions. So we think of articles that we're finding on EBSCO that maybe mention an author's or an expert's opinion. This is going to fall under ethos. Now, it's not the experiment that they're doing, but it's their opinion based on maybe their experience or education. We also look at laws and policies. So we would think of the Constitution as being an authority. We think of school policies as being an authority. We can look at things like scripture that many people regard as authority as well. And then we can look at our own experience and what makes us credible. For many years, I delivered pizzas at Pizza Hut while I was going through my schooling. And so if I was to comment on customers' favorite toppings or how pizza has changed throughout the years, I could be credible because of that experience. So I'm really working on my ethos there. When we look at logos or logic, we're looking at these if-then statements. So we really have two parts. The first part is our data, which is our facts, statistics, polls, or studies. And then we need to interpret that data. So it's going to include reasoning. If this data is true, then what? And so we're using those two parts to create logic. And then in emotion or pathos, we're looking at any types of emotional appeal. Could be fear, joy, shame, and anger. Again, if we're thinking of maybe commercials or selling, we might get somebody who says, if your computer hasn't crashed yet, just wait. And they're working on fear. Or if we think of Bowflex or diet commercials, they're usually working on shame. And so any type of emotion can be applicable for pathos. So let's look at the benefits and drawbacks of ethos. Again, we're looking at authority. So it builds that credibility because we're relying on experts. We might be relying on doctors for medical advice, lawyers for legal advice. we're relying on the experts in order to support our claim. So if I'm talking about maybe spanking children, I might refer back to a behavioral specialist because I don't know enough about that topic. So I'm relying on their authority and their credibility. It also maintains objectivity. I'm not just giving my personal opinions. So it's kind of like I'm taking myself out of the argument and letting the experts do the work for me. And then it saves time. I don't need to collect data or perform studies or have the education or experience that my experts need. Okay, so these are all going to be these benefits of ethos. Now, there are some drawbacks. First, the reader might reject the authority. So we think back as to what we consider authority. We could look at the Constitution. We do have international students who might not regard the Constitution as an authority. If we make an argument based solely on Scripture and our reader denies that authority, we've lost our argument. And then we might also have a higher authority. So we look at a topic like whaling or the killing of whales. This is illegal, I think, across the world, and yet people still do it. And they might be responding to a higher authority than those laws, saying, I do this to feed my children, and that takes precedence, or that's a higher authority than the laws are. Okay, so any of these can cause drawbacks with ethos. Now let's look at logos. Just like with ethos, it can maintain that objectivity because we're taking out our personal opinions. We're looking at data, we're looking at statistics, we're looking at facts. And then where we're rooting our data in facts and in tested material, it helps for audiences who are questionable about your claim. So if we have opponents, they're not going to respond well to emotion. They might not accept some of the authority that we use. They might be better persuaded through the facts that we give. Okay, so logos is good because it is grounded in that factual aspect. There are some drawbacks, however. We are still making predictions based on those facts. So for instance, at one point, scientists have determined how fast a person can run based on gravity, based on wind resistance, based on muscle mass. So they took all these facts and determined how fast somebody could run. But people have run faster. So facts are still projected, and we might not have all the data we need in order to make that projection. Data also needs to be interpreted. So we look at statistics. If a poll comes out or statistics come out about the nation, we see that they are interpreted far differently on Fox News than on CNN. So we're still interpreting that data. And then some readers are skeptical and just don't respond to logic. You can imagine if any of you have children, it's time for bed, and you tell that child, you really need to go to bed because first you wake up cranky some mornings, you have school tomorrow, you need a certain amount of sleep in order for your brain to rest, and your child is not going to respond well to this logic. Usually they will respond better to emotion like fear, either go to bed or you're going to get spanked. Okay, so the same applies to adults. There are some adults who are skeptic to logic, and part of this is valid because, again, we're making projections that maybe haven't come true in the past, and so they look at logic as something more specious. And then we move to pathos. Some of the benefits of pathos are seeing and feeling a problem. So we look at whaling, we go back to the killing of whales. We could say it's illegal, and that's drawing on authority or ethos. We could use logic to say whales are limited in numbers. If they continue to decline by so many percentages per year, we will end up not having whales in the future. So we're looking at that logic. Or we can use pathos. Maybe we can illustrate the killing of a whale and what it looks like, to actually harpoon it, to see it die. That will bring this emotional response that can definitely benefit our argument. It also challenges the reader to be unsympathetic. If you don't feel something, then maybe you don't care about this issue or care about what's going on. And a lot of readers, a lot of people don't want to admit that they don't care what's happening. And then some readers are just more likely to act on emotion. They trust their instincts. They trust how they feel more than logic or other people's opinions. Now, of course, there are drawbacks to emotional appeals. Readers might not be able to identify due to distance. We think about when there is a natural disaster in another country. We feel horrible that people are losing their lives in an earthquake or a tornado. But once we stub our toe or we have a bill to pay, all of a sudden that takes precedence over what's happening far away because it's immediate. It's something that we're feeling. Okay, so distance can really affect our emotions. And then they dissipate over time, which is awesome that they do, because if emotions didn't fade and we suffered a loss, we would feel that loss forever, which I know that there are some losses that people do feel forever, but not at the same intensity. Okay, so they do fade with repetition. Think about the first time that you saw the sad dog commercials with Sarah McLachlan singing "I Will Remember You." The first time you saw it, maybe you felt much differently than now when you see them. The effect is probably worn off. And then again, we talked about when you have opponents, they're less likely to follow emotion as opposed to logic. When we use emotion, if we have a favorable audience, you think of when people speak at the Democratic National Convention or the Republican National Convention. It's a lot of emotion and not so much policy or facts because they know that they already have a favorable audience. So, which one is the best one to use? I would say a combination of all three would be the best because now you're casting a wider net and you're getting a larger reader response.